Well, the experts, quote unquote, are out there trying to confuse you again, ain't they? An expert, quote unquote, guest recently on the Joe Rogan podcast said this: the number one symptom of depression is rumination, pathologically obsessing over your pain. Getting out of your house and accomplishing anything is good for you. Sitting around, and this is the part that just gives me an aneurysm. Sitting around, talking and thinking about your problems is a bad habit. Is this true? Well, let's talk about it in this episode of the Last Symptom podcast. First, we have to do the disclaimer. So let's get that out of the way. Don't go nowhere.
I'm Brian Barnett. I'm just a regular guy. I'm not a doctor. I have no legal license in any field of psychology. But I did live a large part of my life with borderline personality disorder unknowingly. And I really did rid myself of the disorder completely and permanently. Through that, I've become an expert on issues involving emotional health. I accept no responsibility whatsoever for your feelings, thoughts, behaviors, decisions, and actions, including your decision to watch or listen to this show at all. But I do hope you might benefit yourself from the insights I share.
Happy Thursday, everybody. Welcome back to the Last Symptom podcast. I'm Brian Barnett, the creator and host of The Last Symptom. Consider joining our online community on Locals. On the Locals platform, you can find all the links you need for that stuff over at thelastsymptom.com. Just look in the free resources tab. The Last Symptom Fundamentals course is a 2-week intensive pre-recorded course. Works with your personal schedule. You can log on and do it whenever you want. So it works perfectly with your schedule. 2-week intensive pre-recorded course designed to help you gain all the same foundation insights that allowed me to authentically and permanently recover from my emotional disorder, which was borderline personality disorder. I'm sure it can help you with your situation too, regardless of the specific emotional disorder you're dealing with, or maybe you're just dealing with somebody who is dealing with an emotional disorder and you'd like to understand them better. So if that interests you, run over to thelastsymptom.com and click on the tab that says Fundamentals Course up at the top. So I've been seeing around the internet here lately, very popular among quote unquote experts all of a sudden, to talk about rumination as a bad thing. Now, if I had just seen this one time, I might have been willing to let it go. But it's not just one time. I've been seeing it with more and more frequency as this summer has gone by. So I said, well, there needs to be a sane voice out there somewhere warning people of the dangers of believing these false experts. Rumination as a bad thing. They say rumination is at the root of depression. It's at the root of jealousy, at the root of emotional disorders, and so on and so forth. And then on the other hand, you've got me, little old Brian Barnett from The Last Symptom. And I've always told you that rumination is imperative for authentic recovery from these emotional things. Not just it's a nice thing to do from time to time. It is imperative. Rumination. So who's right and who's wrong? Who's lying to you and who's telling you the truth? Well, again, it comes down to these experts, quote unquote, lacking the insight necessary to be talking about these things in the first place. It always comes down to this. They don't understand the difference between guilt and shame. They don't understand the difference between rumination and another thing we're going to be talking about today. In all these cases, it seems like the professional community, those members of the professional community who spew this, it's not just inaccurate information, it's damaging information, as you're going to see as we go on in this conversation, because the things that they say, for those who put stock in it, these things become an unscalable obstacle toward authentic and permanent recovery from these issues that people are looking for help for. So it's not just inaccurate. It's actually obstructive, meaning that these quote unquote experts are actively working against people getting healthy. Now, I don't think that they do this consciously or knowingly. That is irrelevant, though, to the effect that it has on people and the positions in society that these quote unquote experts occupy. They occupy a trusted position, and they get reimbursed well for that trust, don't they? So when an expert, quote unquote, tells you something that actively obstructs you from making genuine progress in recovery, that it is no small thing. You folks have heard me rail against this for years now. Well, that's what's going on here with this rumination thing. They're telling you false information in relation to rumination. They lack the insight necessary to be talking about these things. They open their mouths and end up doing more harm than good in almost all cases. Now, there are exceptions. You know, I have individuals within the professional community to thank for setting me on the right path. So it's not across the board. This applies to everybody who works for the professional communities. But in general, this is the traditionally what the professional community as a group ends up doing. They end up obstructing people from authentic recovery rather than facilitating people's authentic recovery. The insight that they lack is this: taking time to understand the differences between obsession and rumination. Now, let me go back to the very first quote that I quoted at the very beginning. The person blends concepts of obsession with rumination. Here's the quote again. The number one symptom of depression is rumination, false, that's false. And then the quote continues, pathologically obsessing over your pain. So this supposed expert is blending the concept of rumination or ruminating with obsession or obsession. Are they the same thing? They're not the same thing. And to blend them like that is inappropriate. It's inappropriate for anybody to do it, much less somebody who is a supposed quote unquote expert. So they lack the insight to understand and the understanding of what rumination is and what obsession is. And they just throw them in the lump and say they're the same thing. Let's make it easy for them and for you. Obsession is always unhealthy. Rumination is always healthy. Obsession is always non-constructive. Rumination is always constructive. Why can we confidently say this? We can confidently say it because all healthy people spend enormous parts of their days and their lives ruminating. It's one of the things that makes them healthy. Rumination. On the other hand, All unhealthy people spend enormous parts of their lives and their days obsessing. Healthy people ruminate, unhealthy people obsess. Rumination is a fundamentally necessary ingredient to emotional health. You can't have emotional health without rumination. Obsession is fundamentally a necessary ingredient for emotional unhealth or disorder. The word rumination comes from the word rumen. You know what the rumen is on a cud-chewing animal like a goat or a cow? Do you know what the rumen is? It's the first division of the stomach. So they've got basically, certain animals have two stomachs. They've got a temporary stomach, and then they've got the permanent stomach. And what they do is they will chew on grasses and those sorts of things. It'll go into this first part of the stomach, this first division of the stomach, which is called the rumen. And later in the day, when that cow or that goat is sitting under a tree and gets bored or hungry, it'll regurgitate the cud. They call it the cud, but it's just the food that went into that first compartment of that stomach. They regurgitate those grasses and they chew on them some more. If you're a normal human being, you're doing this all the time with your thoughts, this ruminating. In other words, you're pulling out thoughts and memories and stuff like that. You're pulling them out of your rumen, the temporary stomach, pulling them up, chewing over them some more. You ingest some information, and then at a later time, you draw it back up to turn it over in your mind and consider those thoughts some more. Let me ask you a question. Have you seen any summer blockbusters this year? Been a big summer for summer blockbuster movies. Had, Superman. Back several months ago, we had the movie Sinners. That was a super hit. Fantastic Four come out this summer. I just saw it a few weeks ago, about a week ago. Dadgum, that was a good movie. They invested a lot of time and creativity and money, I'm sure, into that movie. See any other movies? Weapons currently. Some movie called Weapons is making big waves at the box office. Well, after seeing any of these movies, and if you didn't see these movies, just think about any movie you've ever gone to the movie theater to see, and ask yourself, when you walked out of the theater after seeing that movie, did you instantly block out any thoughts from your mind of what you just watched? Of course you didn't do that. On the walk out of the theater, on the walk to the car, maybe on the drive home, you replayed parts of that movie in your head, didn't you? I know you did, because that's normal. If you saw the movie with friends and family, you talked together, didn't you, about what you had just seen and experienced. You all ruminated over the film experience together. What you probably did not do is obsess over the movie. I say you probably didn't. I know some people do. They obsess. There's a new movie trailer. Movie's supposed to come out in 2 years. And for the next 2 years, that's all you will hear them talking about, that movie. Some people make a living doing that on the internet, on YouTube and things like that. Their whole channel is dedicated to just obsessing about a certain type of movie or movies in general. But I doubt that that's what you did. It's very unlikely that you obsessed over the new Superman movie. But it's almost a certainty that you did ruminate over it. Same goes if you've read any books lately. How many of you read a book and after the book ends, you put it down, you never think about it again? Nobody does that. You've dedicated all this time and energy into the book, and when the book ends, it's almost a sad event, isn't it? To turn the last page on a book that you've been reading for weeks is a sad thing, and impossible for you to just shut the book, set it down, and never think about it again. How about the Bible? Bible definitely requires some rumination to get the full sense of what you're reading, doesn't it? The Bible is not written so that you just read it like a novel and walk away and never think about it again. No, the Bible is written to be ruminated over, to be meditated on. So you read a chapter of the Bible and you say, I need to sit here and think about this for a little bit to understand why this is even in here. How does this relate, for example, to the promised Messiah, if you're reading the old Hebrew scriptures? How does this tie into God's promise of the Messiah coming? And then later, when you're reading the Greek scriptures, what do you got to ruminate on? How is this fulfillment of Bible prophecy from clear back in the Hebrew scriptures? So the Bible, by nature, requires rumination. Otherwise, you don't get the sense of it. Rumination is a non-negotiable ingredient for authentic recovery from emotional disorders because there is no other way for any individual to work out the particulars and the mechanics of what is going on inside of himself or herself without pulling up uncomfortable memories and thoughts and then studying them, turning them over and over in your mind in an honest way to try to learn and gain insight from them, learn practical lessons from them, to gain insights from them, and to understand the natural effect of feelings and thoughts on ourselves, past experiences, natural effect on ourselves, past memories, natural effect on ourselves today. How do they affect my feelings? How do they affect the way I choose to think? And how do these things affect what I ultimately do or don't do? We'll go back to the original quote again, the person on Rogan. What did the person say? The person said, sitting around talking and thinking about your problems is a bad habit. Well, in the context of obsession, they're right. But we're not talking about obsession. We're talking about rumination. Tell me what the difference is between obsession, when we say sitting around talking and thinking about your problems. Could that be obsession? It could be. Could it be rumination? Yeah, it could be. So do you see why I say it's really important to make the distinction between obsession and rumination? Sitting around talking and thinking about your problems could either be rumination or obsession. What determines which one is which? Well, the expert here, quote unquote, is not helping you at all, because what the expert is doing is combining concepts of rumination with obsession. Remember? Person says, the number one symptom of depression is rumination, pathologically obsessing over your pain. Well, what is it? What are you talking about? Are you talking about rumination or are you talking about obsession? It matters. Because sitting around talking and thinking about my problems might be me obsessing, but not necessarily. It might just be me ruminating. One thing is for certain, a constant feature of emotional disorder or of emotional unhealth is people running from uncomfortable thoughts and feelings. And yet this supposed expert is saying, do more of that. Let me say it again. A constant feature, the thing that makes it possible, emotional unhealth possible, are people running from emotionally uncomfortable thoughts and feelings. And what is this quote unquote expert on Rogan saying? Effectively, the quote unquote expert is saying, do more of that. That can't be the answer to anything, can it? Because if that were the answer, we wouldn't have any unhealthy people. So opposites and contrasts are important in your work with emotional issues, your emotional issues. Meaning, for example, if your whole life, you as an unhealthy person, somebody who has been living with an emotional disorder, if your default way of approaching life has been to run from all of your uncomfortable thoughts and feelings, that can't be the answer to authentic recovery, can it? It absolutely cannot be. So what is the answer? Well, it has to be the opposite of that. Whatever your custom has been, which has resulted in you being this miserable, unhealthy, disordered person, well, then the answer to being not disordered and happy and experiencing peace has to be the opposite of whatever it is you've been doing. So the idea that this quote unquote expert puts out there of don't sit around worrying about your problems and stuff, just run from them. Continue running from them as you always have, has to be complete bull horse poop pooey, right? It's complete baloney. Listen to this. Rumination is a healthy aspect of life. Normal people do it all the time. Why would it be beneficial to ruminate after a movie that you've just seen, but it wouldn't be beneficial to ruminate over your childhood? Think about the reasons why you ruminate over the movie. To enjoy it, to draw more things out of the movie that maybe you didn't pick up as you were watching the movie. And when you're discussing it with other people, what's the benefit of that? Well, they pick up on things that you didn't pick up on, don't they? Never forget watching the movie Signs with my late friend Jordan Selvage. And we watched it together, me, him, and his dad. And I come out of the movie, I thought it was a pretty daggum good movie. And we were talking about it. We were ruminating over the movie. Oh, do you remember this part? Oh, you remember that part? And I'll never forget, Jordan says to me, one thing I really liked about that movie is this and this and this. So I'm not going to go into it, but there was a thing caught in the storytelling that I had not picked up on. It just completely went over my head. But it was probably the most valuable part of the entire movie. And he picked up on it, and he shared that with me. As soon as he shared it with me, I could see it. And I've never forgotten that part of the movie. Well, I'll go ahead and tell you the part. Mel Gibson plays a man who, I guess he was a preacher, and he's kind of had, his faith is being challenged because his wife is being killed. So he's hateful toward God. And at one part of the movie, Mel Gibson's son says to him, "I hate you." And Mel Gibson just takes it. He doesn't get mad, doesn't punish the kid or anything like that. He just takes it because he knows that the child is speaking ignorantly, is speaking from emotion, that he doesn't really mean it. That Mel Gibson's son doesn't really hate him. He's just hurting. Well, then later in the movie, there's a part where Mel Gibson is under a lot of stress and, a lot of things are happening. And Mel Gibson says the same thing to God. "I hate you." And what Jordan picked up on was, he says, that it was a parallel. It was a parallel. It happened completely different parts of the movie, but he says it's a parallel. The idea is that God knows that Mel Gibson is speaking emotionally, that he's scared, that he doesn't really mean what he's saying. Just like earlier, it happened between Mel Gibson and his son, where his son said the same thing to Mel Gibson. Well, that's the whole story right there. I mean, that's the whole beauty of that movie is right there, and it went right over my head. Well, Jordan shares that part with me, and of course, then what do? I go off and I ruminate about that. I'm still thinking about it today, 20 years later, or however long it's been. But you see, that's the rumination part. You extract lessons and insights when you're ruminating. So rumination is always a healthy aspect of life. Emotional health requires it. What is the unhealthy opposite of rumination? Well, some might say it's obsession, and there's no doubt that obsession is always unhealthy. Obsession and rumination, not the same thing. Although, as we've already mentioned, on the surface there seem to be some similarities, but not the same thing. Fix my microphone here. Okay. So not the same thing. And obsession is not the opposite of rumination. So what is the opposite of rumination? The unhealthy opposite of rumination is avoidance, not obsession. Why do I say that? Well, let's think about it for a second. The purpose of rumination is to ruminate. Remember, you pull up your cud and you chew over it some more. So you bring it up out of the rumen and you're turning it over, you're chewing on it, you're thinking about it, you're analyzing it. So obsession can't be the opposite of rumination, because obsession also involves turning something over in your mind over and over and over again. We're going to talk about it a little bit more here in just a second. But it can't be the opposite of rumination, because it has to be the complete, it's black and white. It's got to be the complete opposite. It can't involve turning something over in your mind if it's going to be the opposite of rumination. So what is the opposite of rumination? It's avoidance. It's not even bringing something up into the mind. It's not even chewing on a thing or turning it over or even bringing it up. Avoidance is the opposite of rumination. You run from it rather than embrace it or pull it up. You deny it rather than accept it and analyze it. So when people run from their unpleasant thoughts and feelings and refuse to ruminate on them, this is the opposite of rumination. In fact, people who do this might pretend that these thoughts and these feelings don't exist at all. These memories don't exist at all. These experiences I had in the past, they did not exist. If they start to come up into the memory, they push them right out. Push them right out. Nope, that's uncomfortable. That's shameful. It's embarrassing. It's a terrifying thought, the idea that memory or that experience could ever get out and people could learn about it. Nope, it didn't happen. It didn't happen. See, that's avoidance. If the thoughts and the feelings persist, what will people like this do to ensure that they don't have to face those uncomfortable thoughts and feelings? It's interesting. It's a natural consequence of having uncomfortable thoughts and feelings, painful thoughts and feelings, experiences, memories, those sorts of things. A natural consequence of this, of denial, is numbing. Numbing and pretending the things don't exist. So these sorts of people who are living this type of lifestyle, what they will do is they will engage in all sorts of dulling or distracting behaviors. A lot of addictions. A lot of addictions are born from this sort of running away from unpleasant memories, thoughts, and feelings. Sex. Sex is a good distraction. Drugs, alcohol. But even otherwise seemingly healthy things can turn into a mechanism to dull or to distract from unhealthy thoughts and feelings and memories. I use drawing cartoons. That was my drug of choice. Because I could get lost in this fictional world. I could create the world. I could manipulate the characters, have them do what I wanted them to do, have them not do what I didn't want them to do, and gave me great control over a life that was not mine. Whereas my life was painful and chaotic and disordered. This hobby, if you want to call it, gave me a way to distract myself from all those unpleasant thoughts and feelings and to have a sense of control. But mostly it was just distraction, dull distract. Working out in the gym, obsession with being in the gym is an example of this. Obsession with a hobby, obsession with work. Never being anywhere without distractions like music, noise, TV, some sort of activity. Talked to a feller one time. He said, I can't drive. He said, notice after listening to the last Symptom, when I drive down the road, I have to have something going on. I have to have a radio. I have to be listening to talk radio. I have to have something going on distracting me. And he says, and if I don't, let's say that my radio is broken in my truck. He says, I catch myself like counting road markers. It's just ridiculous things I would never do otherwise. Why am I driving down the road counting road markers? Who does that? Well, I'll tell you somebody who does that. Somebody who can't stand to be with their thoughts is somebody who does that. It's avoidance. Took a friend of mine out into the backcountry here last summer. First time he'd been in the backcountry. It was like a 4-day, 3-night excursion. We get out there, we're hiking along, we got like 10-mile days to cover. Through the mountains. Beautiful. We're out in nature. No sounds from like civilized society, no sounds of trucks or airplanes or electronics or jackhammers or anything like that. Just beautiful, peaceful woods. Well, you know what the beautiful, peaceful woods will do to a person who can't stand to be alone with his thoughts? It'd drive him crazy. Drive him crazy if he's not conscious of what's going on or why he acts that way. Why can't he just enjoy the sounds of the birds in the woods? The sounds of the skeeters, the bites of the skeeters, sounds of the frogs, things like that. Because such a person is not used to life without distractions. Distractions from unpleasant thoughts and feelings. So he got out his phone, he started playing music, not in his earbuds, playing the music out loud so everybody could hear as we were hiking along. It was driving me nuts because my whole purpose for being out there is to enjoy the sounds of the woods, to get away from civilization, the artificial world that we all live in. And here we get out into the woods where I'm going to get to experience this. And he pulls out his phone and starts playing music the whole day, the whole daggum day. I let it go that time. But what I realized is that from now on, if I'm going to host taking somebody out into the backcountry before we ever finalize plans, I need all people to come to an agreement with me that they will not do that. If they want to listen to their radio or they want to listen to music or an audiobook or something like that, they have to do it with earbuds. They are not to disrupt the environment for everybody else who's going out there into the woods. But that's just one example. I have another friend. He claims that he hates having all these building projects in the summer. Now he works this full-time job, gets like Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday off. And instantly fills up those days with commitments to build things for people, like decks, patios, porches, things like that. And I was talking to him one day. He says, man, I haven't had a spare moment all summer. I said, well, why not? Because I take on all these projects. He said, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to slow life down a little bit. And he can't do it. He can't do it. He told me that like 3 years ago. And every summer has been the same. In fact, every summer he takes on more and more. Why? Because this is what he uses as his whiskey. It's a distraction. He doesn't have to sit with any of his uncomfortable thoughts or memories or anything like that. So how does it manifest? It manifests in him staying constantly busy with these projects. He doesn't need the money. He absolutely doesn't need the money. It's not a money-driven thing. It's that he cannot sit still. So all of these sorts of behaviors are aspects of obsession and avoidance. The desperate emotional need to avoid creates obsession. Now, it could be the other way. Obsession and avoidance are interesting because that's one way that it might manifest. Like your avoidance of certain memories and thoughts and uncomfortable feelings can lead to obsession in the gym, in your building projects, drawing, fishing, even. It can create obsession in anything. But on the other hand, obsession could be focused on the uncomfortable memory, or the uncomfortable thought, or the uncomfortable feeling. And that's also not good. So I'm not advocating obsession or obsessing over uncomfortable thoughts, feelings, and memories and experiences from the past. But the solution is never avoidance. The solution is rumination. The solution is not obsession. The solution is rumination. Have you ever bought like going to Walmart or any of these sorts of places and bought like a bookcase or a futon or a cabinet or something that when you get it back home, it comes in a box and it's got instructions and it's got all the parts there. It's got like an Allen wrench included. It's got different types of screws and bolts. And it's your job when you get it home to assemble this bookcase or this cabinet or whatever. I have. I've done that a lot. And inevitably what happens is that I get halfway into putting this daggum thing together before I get lost. I realize I thought I could do this without the instructions, but now I'm having trouble getting, I don't know where this part goes. I don't know what this screw belongs to. It's a completely different screw from the other screws. And you share my pain, I'm sure. So many times when I'm trying to assemble something that I bought from the store, about halfway through, I have to sit down. Dadgum, give me the instructions. It's like the old joke about husbands never asking for directions when driving. Well, the same thing happens when we're trying to build things. We say, "Oh, I'll figure it out." And I get about halfway into it, and I don't know where I'm at, where this part goes, or anything like that. So, get the instructions out. The instructions are always terrible, minimal text. Most of it is just these really basic line drawings. And many times I have to stop what I'm doing, sit down with those instructions, let my frustrations calm just a bit. And then I just sit there with those instructions in my hand and me looking at those instructions with a calm mind. And what happens while I'm sitting there with those instructions? My brain plays around with thoughts of what I'm looking at. All right, I'm looking at these drawings. I know what that part is. I know what this part is. Do those two parts go together? I thought I already tried to put those two parts together and they wouldn't go together. What have I tried? What have I not tried? What part is being depicted here in the drawing? How are those two parts supposed to fit together? And so forth. You see, this is rumination. I'm looking at the drawings. I'm patiently and calmly taking my time to try to understand them, learn whatever I can from those drawings, see if I can't get a sense of them firmly in my mind. And then from the insights I'm drawing from those instructions, I'm now taking those insights and I'm applying them to my renewed effort to get that cabinet put together or that futon or that bookcase, whatever. What I'm not doing is obsessing over the instructions. It's not like I'm crowding out all of my other thoughts are being crowded out by just these instructions. And it's not like I'm going to bed that night with thoughts of the instructions bombarding my mind to the point that I can barely sleep or think about any other things. Like, what am I going to accomplish tomorrow? I can't think about that. I got to think about the stupid instructions of that bookcase. That's all I can think about. I forego meals because all I can think about are those instructions. See, that's obsession. Another thing I'm not doing is I'm not avoiding the instructions. That is to say, I'm not running from them, refusing to think about them, pretending they don't exist, drowning out all memory of the instructions by blasting loud music or by going to the gym and lifting weights for 2 hours or by mowing my grass as an excuse to not have to think about those daggum instructions. Nope. I put down my screwdriver. I pick up the instructions. I sit down with them. And I quietly and calmly allow my brain to look at the pictures and to work out what they mean. What can I learn from them? I ruminate. And along with this rumination, insight and understanding eventually come to me. I finally see what the drawings mean and how the futon or the cabinet is meant to be put together. Now when I go back to working on the cabinet or the futon or whatever it is I'm working on, I'm applying the insights that I got from the instructions that I sat and I worked out in my mind. That's rumination. This is no different at all with how rumination works when it comes to authentic recovery from emotional health issues or emotional disorders. It's not avoidance. Avoidance is what unhealthy people already have a lifetime of practice doing. It's not obsession. Obsession also is a lifelong practice of people who are unhealthy. So instead, what we're talking about here is rumination. Do you see? Are you beginning to see how rumination is always healthy? It's not the same as obsession. And a lot of these quote unquote experts, what they're talking about is obsession, not rumination. By lumping the two things together, they're handicapping you if you trust these people. Obsession needs to be done away with. Rumination must be adopted. Absolutely necessary. So when it comes to our emotional health, the thing to do is not to obsess over the past, but to ruminate over the past. Ruminating in the same way that you ruminate over the printed instructions of how to assemble that daggum bookcase. So now do you understand once again just how incredibly unjust it is for these quote-unquote experts of the professional community to once again, is a recurring theme of Last Symptom, how the experts, quote-unquote, of the professional community are out there telling people the exact opposite of what they need to know. Instead of having the insight and discernment to distinguish between obsession and rumination, they instead tell their followers to not do the very thing they must do in order to ever get healthy. Instead, they say, don't do that. That's bad. It means you're unhealthy. You're unhealthy if you're doing this thing that is absolutely necessary for healthy people. Rumination and obsession are not the same thing. Rumination is always constructive. Rumination is an inseparable part of good health. So rumination is simply the regurgitation of information. Remember, memories and thoughts are just information. So you're regurgitating something with what purpose? See, this is what distinguishes between obsession and rumination. You have to ask yourself, what is the purpose behind each one? What is motivating each one? What motivates obsession? Does it have a purpose? The answer is no, it doesn't have a purpose. I'm going to illustrate it here in a minute. But rumination always has a constructive purpose. Before I forget, think about like you've got a piece of meat on a spit, right? You've got two sticks, you've got a fire, and you've got a piece of meat. You've skewered it with a stick, and now it's hanging over the fire, and you're just turning that meat. Obsession would be turning that meat over that fire with no purpose whatsoever. The purpose, or the thing motivating the activity, in the case of obsession, is simply just turning the meat. That is the whole purpose, just to turn the meat over and over and over again, forever. That's obsession. But with obsession, there is no, okay, I'm going to turn the meat until it's well cooked and then I'm going to eat it. No, that doesn't factor into obsession at all. For obsession, the whole purpose of turning the meat is simply turning the meat. But for rumination, the whole purpose of turning the meat is to make sure it's well cooked so you can eat it. This is the difference between obsession and rumination. Obsession has no purpose. The obsessing itself is the purpose for obsession. Rumination, on the other hand, the whole purpose of rumination is drawing insights and understanding from what you're turning over and over in your mind. What practical things can I learn from this? What insights can I gain from this to know what to do next? Obsession does not have that purpose. Obsession's whole purpose, remember, is to simply obsess. It's not trying to draw insights or try to figure out how to do or what to do or how to do things better moving forward, or to learn something that will help you avoid that problem in the future. That's rumination. Obsession does not have such purpose. Rumination does not focus on things that are not practically useful to the person doing the ruminating. Or let's put it this way, rumination does not focus on aspects of what is completely outside the control or the power of the person doing the ruminating. For example, let's try to illustrate this. Let's say that while building the cabinet and ruminating over the instructions, so you've brought this box home from the store. You're trying to put this cabinet together. And you get the instructions out, and while you're looking at the instructions, you realize that there is a type of screw illustrated in the instructions that you cannot find in the box that you brought home from the store. So now you're ruminating over these instructions, and you realize these instructions show a type of screw that is necessary to assemble this cabinet, but I don't have that screw. It's missing. What would obsession be? Obsession would be to continue thinking nonstop about how the factory left out that screw. It's irritating you so much, you just walk around all afternoon thinking about how you cannot believe that you got the one box where they left out that screw. What's the problem with that sort of thinking? The problem is that it's completely pointless. It accomplishes nothing. It has no purpose. It's completely non-constructive to just be walking around, turning over and over in your mind the idea that you got the one box and they left out that screw. How does that help you? It doesn't help you. You allowing yourself to think nonstop about how the factory omitted a screw, and to allow these thoughts to drown out all other thoughts for the whole afternoon, that night, even the next day, serves no constructive purpose at all. It is completely purposeless. It is completely pointless. On the other hand, rumination, by contrast, would focus on how to solve the problem of getting the cabinet built to completion despite the missing screw. Why? Because rumination looks for insight and understanding. It has a constructive purpose. Okay, so I didn't get this screw. Do I have any screws that might work in place of the screw that was supposed to come with this cabinet? Can I get by with using one of the other screws, or is that going to leave me empty-handed later on in another part of the assembly of this cabinet? Rumination is the search for insight and understanding, practical insight and understanding. Obsession is not the search for any such thing. Remember, the purpose of obsession is obsessing. The purpose of rumination is to draw out insights and understanding. So, back to that illustration of turning meat on a spit over and over again. In the example of rumination, you're turning the meat over and over again with the purpose of cooking it well and evenly so that you can eat it and have a delicious meal. For obsession, there is no such purpose as that. When it comes to obsession, the whole purpose is just to continue turning the meat over and over and over and over and over again to infinity. There's no end to it. There's no finish line. See, rumination has an intended finish line, and obsession does not. Obsession, meat on a spit. No end in mind of having well-cooked meat and eating it. No, the objective is just to continue turning and cooking that meat forever. Just for the sake of turning and cooking the meat. That's the whole activity right there. What about avoidance? Well, apparently, avoidance is what the harmful and incompetent quote-unquote experts are telling people is the answer these days. It's just so unjust because the people who listen to them and trust them will say, the experts tell me not to ruminate on any of the bad thoughts or feelings. So the opposite of that is to continue running from them forever. And do you know what? That'll suit most unhealthy people just fine because it's already what they've spent a lifetime doing, which ironically is part of the foundation of all their problems to begin with. So the professional community is saying, just do more of that. That's the answer. It's not the answer. If it were the answer, nobody on earth would be dealing with emotional issues. Avoidance is the easiest thing in the world. It's also one of the most destructive. It's one of the most destructive things in the world, avoidance. Unfortunately, it's also the easiest. When you get into an argument with somebody and both of you's got your feelings hurt, what is easier? To pretend like the argument didn't happen? To not talk to the other person until they come groveling to you with an apology? Those are easy, aren't they? Both those things are very easy. Is it easy to say, you know what? I don't really think I was in the wrong here, but I care about that person and I want to maintain peace and I want to preserve my friendship with that person. So I am going to go to them and I'm going to find something that I can sincerely apologize for. So maybe the thing you were arguing about, you were right about, but perhaps you're not satisfied with the way you behaved. Now you go to the person, you say, you know what, I'm sorry. I behaved real poorly and I regret it. I shouldn't have behaved that way. That's hard. That's very hard to do. It's much easier to just do the other two things. Pretend it didn't happen. Wait for them to come groveling to you. It doesn't require any energy, does it? The harder thing is to swallow your pride and go make the first move to repair that relationship. Find something that you can genuinely apologize for that you regret. I'm not suggesting apologize for things you're not actually sorry for. So, for example, if I get into an argument with somebody and we both behave poorly, but I think, I was in the right there. As far as what the argument was about, I was in the right there. Well, I'm not going to go to the person and say, hey, I'm sorry for this thing that I'm right about. If I don't believe that I was wrong, can I Can I possibly apologize to the person in a sincere way? Obviously not. So I have to find something that I can be sincere about in my apology. Apologies don't matter unless you're sincere about it. So you have to find something that you're sincere about when you apologize. That's the opposite of avoidance. And that requires determined proaction. Proaction. A healthy life is a proactive life. What's another thing? Another thing is that if your whole life has been an avoidance type of life, and you've got all these emotional issues and emotional problems, they run in your family because everybody's living the same way, living with the same attitudes. Are those underlying issues ever going to get fixed by not thinking about them? By not thinking about the fundamental issues involved and their effects on you and all the people you know? Are those things ever going to get fixed? No, you can't run from uncomfortable thoughts and feelings. That's what people in these unhealthy families already have generations of history doing. So it requires the exact opposite of that, doesn't it? Not obsession, not obsessing over the past, but ruminating over the past. What's the point of rumination? To draw out insights and understanding. With insights and understanding, you can look at things differently moving forward and do things differently moving forward. But if you never do that, can that ever happen? Of course not. A lot of unhealthy people out there going to see these quote unquote experts and they're going to say, well, they tell me not to ruminate on any of the bad thoughts or feelings. So I'll just keep running from them forever. And the people will stay unhealthy forever. Rumination is healthy. It's always healthy. It's not the same as obsession. And maybe one of these days, these quote unquote experts with their years of schooling in all these elite universities, with all their fake qualifications, a paper is not a qualification for helping people with these emotional disorders. You know what the qualification for helping people with emotional disorders is? Insight. So maybe one of these days, these fake experts will figure that out. In the meantime, I hope that you will not only adopt rumination as a daily part of your life. Anytime you hear somebody say rumination is at the root of depression, you say, no, false. It's obsession, not rumination. Obsession is at the root of things like jealousy, depression, disorder, not rumination. Rumination is an inseparable feature of emotional health. Do that. Make that correction. There has to be a pushback on false information. So rumination's always healthy. Adopt it as part of your daily life. I ruminate daily. Daily. Rumination is not just drawing lessons from unpleasant things, unpleasant memories and thoughts and that sort of thing. Rumination you can ruminate over lots of positive things too. You can ruminate over what you read in the news. You can ruminate over a movie, over a book, over an experience. Rumination is not just going into unpleasant, painful memories and learning things from them. Rumination happens all the time. It's happening all the time. And one of the things that I would like it to happen for is with this episode of the Last Symptom podcast. It's worth your time, once this episode ends, to ruminate over what we've talked about. Ruminate very hard over the differences between rumination, obsession, and avoidance. Compare and contrast. Distinguish. That way, when you hear other people using them incorrectly, you can set them straight. Ruminate very hard over the differences between rumination, obsession, and avoidance and the things we've talked about in this program. Take the time to make comparisons and contrasts in your mind about these three things, and that can help you see why two of them are unhealthy and one of them is very healthy, why two of them are completely non-constructive and why one is absolutely constructive. and the changes that you can begin making in your thinking and your behaviors as it relates to these things and other things. Well, folks, I hope you've all been doing well out there. New episodes of the Last Symptom podcast are few and far between these days. It's because most of my focus is on our live streams, on our group, on locals. So we'd love to have you join us there. I do exclusive live streams there on Mondays. So we would love to have you come into our group. You can do that by going to thelastsymptom.locals, LOCALS.com, or by downloading the locals.com app from the App Store and then just searching for The Last Symptom by Brian Barnett within. We'll see you there, and I'll see you on one of our upcoming live streams. I think the Last Symptom podcast, for now anyway, is going to be, it's kind of like the old Columbo specials. Remember when Columbo was on TV? It wasn't like a regular TV series. It would just be like a TV special every once in a while. And I think that's what the Last Symptom podcast is going to be for now, at least. Anyway, hope you're all doing well out there. I'll see you over there on Locals, okay? Y'all take care.